Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and welcome to the reading of the Hazards of the Old Ones. Yes, beginning a brand new book, and this week we'll be reading the Prologues. Back in my earlier writing days, I was big into Prologues, and this one has 3 of them. They're fairly short, and we'll knock them all out, and then begin the main body of the text next week. This is a departure from my previous readings, which mostly dealt with the second series of the League of Elder, which is the same universe that I established in the earlier books, only with a different cast of characters. You had Paymaster Stenstrom, Kat, Tara, Lord Aram, Lady Alesta, that sort of thing. The original League of Elder dealt with the House of Blanchford, with Captain Davidge, the Lord of Blanchford, and his Countess, Lady Sigillis, an ex-Black Hat, and a pretty nasty one at that. If you've listened to my previous readings and you listened to the Bloodstein books, you've met their children, Lord Cable, his sister Lady Kylos, his cousins, Lady Sarah, and so forth. And those are the progeny of Captain Davidge and Lady Sigillis. The Hazards is Book 2 in the order of writing in the League of Elder, the original book. And then this one follows pretty much right after. Published in 2010. Has it been that long already? Wow. After Book 1, I had a lot of big ideas that didn't make it into the pages of Book 1. Book 1 was kind of a character study. Usually authors, when they look back on their own work, tend to not like their Book 1. My writing style was pretty raw. I did a fair amount of exposition and so forth. You just love to write when you're just starting out and flex your chops and let everyone know how much you can create. And eventually you stop doing that. You're like, I'm just gonna, plot is the king, at least in this current environment that we live in. Otherwise you're gonna lose your reader. They're gonna get bored if you just go off on a tangent. So my books become more and more minimalist as we go along. The first book was not minimalist at all. This book is kind of a middling between that. There's a little bit of backstory, but not too much. Not as much as in Book 1. And I really like how the characters develop from Book 1 to Book 2. And people who've read Book 1 really like the direction that the characters go in this book, The Hazards of the Old Ones. I wrote it sort of as a standalone. My thought was that you could just pick this book up and read it and enjoy it and not have to have read Book 1. That was my goal. I had a lot to say, and I had to add some additional stuff because my beta readers told me when they first read it that this was just a straight action adventure book when I first read it. But my beta readers told me this story lacks a heart. It's okay, but there's no heart and soul to this book. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course it has a heart. Like, no, it doesn't. And, I just kind of sat there and stewed. I'm like, hey, what are you talking about? A heart and a soul? What the hell? Shish. But then I begin to think about it. I'm like, well, I think I can add a few bits here and there and maybe give it some of this missing heart and soul. So I started adding, and eventually I added about 150 pages at least. This book is around, 180, 190,000 words. It's, well into the 400-page range. One of my larger books, but I think the additions I made succeeded in giving this book a heart and a soul, and it sort of took over the book. I didn't expect that when I first wrote it, but that's how things happen. Things happen sometimes out of your control. This is by far my most spiritual book, and you'll see as we get into the pages, lots of questions are asked and posed to the readers, and see if you come to the same conclusions that the characters come to. The title, The Hazards of the Old Ones, has two distinct meanings. One of them is fairly obvious once we get to it in the text. The other one, not so much. And you have to infer it and pay attention to what the characters say, and then it becomes clear. And that becomes basically the theme of the book. You know, what is a hazard of the old one? And the old ones, this is not a Lovecraftian book. The old ones are the gods, basically. It's the same way in Lovecraft, I guess, but this is not a Lovecraftian book. The cover that you're seeing right now, Carol Phillips painted, so I think it's one of my favorite covers. I just like all the things that are in it. Things you don't see at first, but as you scan it and look at it, you begin to see more and more. And dipping my foot into the waters, I was thinking of creating this as an NFT. You environmental pirate, you. Hey, why not? Have to figure out how to make NFTs first. That's a big thing. But I really like this cover. This version of the book is a redo. Originally, this was a wrap. So you saw just all of the cover, and then kind of where that little plant is in the pool of water, that was the spine of the book, and then stuff on the left is the back of the book. But I thought not being able to see the picture, the painting all at once, lost something, so we redid it so that you can see the whole thing, a little shrunk down. But you see the whole thing, you can enjoy the various layers of symmetry and drama that Carol put into it. Really beautiful cover, like it a lot. So, as I said, published in 2010. I was still finding my way as an author, finding my voice. This book goes a long way into establishing the voice that I would eventually use throughout the rest of the books. This week, we cover the prologues, and there's 3 of them, 1, 2, 3, and as usual, my prologues are kind of weird. You're sort of dropped into a situation, and I really don't explain too much of it. You just have to read it and go with it. Although I will assist with that between each prologue. I'll give you some info, and I'll give you a timestamp, so if you don't want to hear this spoilerific info, you can just skip ahead to the next one. First prologue is called Item 10, Save Planet X. Kind of an odd title, but my prologues are always kind of weird. So let's get down to it. Prologue 1 of The Hazards of the Old One, Item 10, Save Planet X. May all be saved. He watched the kittens finish their lunch of warm milk lapped up from a saucer. It was a little chilly out in the grove today, and he heated a few rocks so they would radiate steady warmth all afternoon. When the kittens, a spry bunch of mackerel tabbies, finished, he removed the saucer from their box and gently nosed them around, situating them for sleep. A few, full from their lunch, were already out. The rest licked his nose with their tiny tongues. He had found the kittens in the back half of the grove the other day, hungry, looking for their mother. As always, he gathered the little buggers up and took care of them. He was always on the lookout for lost creatures needing help. He was friend to all tiny things gone astray. He'd rescued a goose with a hurt wing and an ibex with a bad hoof. The elemental spirits called down from the top of the universal tree and laughed at him. They said he had the whole universe to play in. Why bother with the grove and the mundane little creatures he found there? They pestered him to join them in the celestial arboreum. They said that's where he belonged. but time enough for the universe later. He was content where he was for the time being. Like the kittens he watched over, he was only a few months old. His mind, however, was packed with information. He knew the old stories and the wisdom that had been won over the centuries. He possessed knowledge spanning the ages, for it had been carefully built into him by his mother. When the kittens settled, he got his book out. He had a book that he conjured up whenever he wanted. It was a thick diary entitled Cara Hill's Magic Book of Things to Do and Memorable Quotes. He created it himself. In it, nuggets of wisdom, lists, and notes automatically scratched themselves on the pages. Sometimes he scribbled things in himself with a marker held in his teeth, for he didn't have hands to write with. Mother certainly picked an odd form for him to inhabit, though he could have hands if he wanted. He could be anything he wanted. However, he mostly confined himself to the small, streamlined shape Mother had given him. He loved writing things down in his book. It helped keep the mind clear, and he liked to be organized. Today's read, Thought for the day. No hour is too early, and no labor is too great for a friend in need. To do. Item 1. Feed the kittens. Done. Item 2. Heat up a few rocks for the kittens. Might be chilly today. Done. Item 3. Prank Mother. Hide her favorite hat. Item 4. Prank Lord Blanchford. Hide his favorite hat too, preferably in a different place than you hid Mother's hat. Item 5. Prank Countess Blanchford. Undetermined. Possibly steal a gown from her wardrobe and hang it from the Josephina Tower pole, where it may clearly be seen from the village. Warning! Countess might still be angry from the pie-in-the-face fiasco last week and the missing knickers. Tread with caution. A. Prank Countess anyways. Item 6. Check kitten's box for litter. Well, that should make for a full day. The other ones, the lesser creations of murky silver Mother tinkered about with, gathered to watch him fuss and write in his book. They were drawn to him as always, but he paid them no mind. They were crude silver automatons. He, on the other hand, was a masterpiece, a one-of-a-kind. To use sporting terms, he considered himself the Cinco Pass, the Royal Flush Draw, or the 710 pickup, while they were warm-up pitches, a pair of deuces and a late gutter ball at best. Mother wasn't going to be outdoing herself anytime soon. Possibly, without realizing it, his mother, with rolled-up sleeves and torrents of silver, had created an elemental spirit, in essence, a god. He was a god who loved to protect lost kittens and hang gowns from flagpoles. He was going to head out and set to his pranks. He loved pranking his mother and the people in the castle. He meant no harm, and Lord Blanchford actually pranked him back with a pail full of fish guts the other day. That was good, clean fun. He'd been avoiding Countess Blanchford. Her reaction to his thrown pie at the spring ball was rather volcanic and unflattering. Ah well, perhaps when she returns from the village and sees her gown hanging from the flagpole, her demeanor will improve. He checked the kittens one last time when his book opened and a fresh entry scratched itself in. Item 7. Encounter a demonic version of yourself in the grove. That's when he came stumping around the green leafy corner, an image of himself, a backwards, distorted, maniacal image of a sadistic being. They stood there staring at each other. Though the image was evil and somewhat terrifying to behold, he had to admit the brute was devilishly handsome. If he had any flaws or vices, pride, it must be said, was his. He was a bit of a narcissist. He knew from the ancient wisdom that meeting oneself was a dire omen. Nothing good can happen when confronted with one's twin, and there he was, an exact copy. Only his eyes were foreboding, and his smiling mouth was prickly with serrated teeth like a shark. This was an image of himself turned into a demon. Becoming a demon was his greatest fear. Becoming a demon was a punishment for misuse of power and the breaking of universal rules of balance. Demons were sent to the bottom of the universal tree, to the huddled, steam-shot buildings of the windage of kind. The sullen windows of the windage were dark, betraying nothing of the terrors hidden within, except for the occasional red eyes peering out. He'd been to the windage once and didn't like it much. A dirty, noisy place. Every so often, since the time of his birth, his book flipped a page and scratched out an odd, reoccurring entry that perplexed him. Someone stares out the windows of the windage of kind at you. She's not a bad girl. Just needs a little love. Maybe a bright smile will make her happy. She hasn't been happy in a long time. You should make it a point to visit her. She'd like that. Demons have feelings too. Who was this girl the book kept mentioning? And what was she doing in the windage? Once, he actually decided to take his book's advice and went to the windage, staring into the windows. He saw huddled shapes within and blinking red eyes looking out, seeking forgiveness. His book interjected, "She's not there. You missed her." His twin stood there and sniffed. "I smell sweet morsels. Give them to me." He got in front of the box containing his kittens to protect them. The image laughed. "I am you, merely unbound," his twin said. "You like to protect the weak. Then look at me. I have a rare treat for you. See what is to come. I offer you a vision." His book added another entry. Item 6. Witness the horrific vision of the death of billions. "Look at me and see what is to come," his twin said again. He didn't want to look, but his evil twin insisted. "Look, look, see the dying. Listen to the screaming. Can you hear it? Can you hear it?" He looked into his twin's wide eyes and saw everything. So much death. So much loss under purple skies upon sandy ground. He listened to dying mouths praying to be saved. "Save us! Who will save us? What have we done to deserve this?" He stood there on his haunches and wept, unable to turn away. "You can save them," he said. "None of this has to be. Simply go there and perform a miracle. Listen to their praise. They will love you. They will lift their cups and call you a god. Be a god for them and set me free. I can't simply save a bunch of people. I'll become a demon. I'll go to the windage." His evil twin faded away. "Then it's all on your conscience. Save them and set me free." He stood there alone in the grove, open mouthed, panting. Save them? What was he supposed to do? How could he prevent such a thing? It's not fair. Not fair. Why should he bother? Why was it his responsibility? There are others. There are many gods floating about. Let somebody else take care of it. This was too much for him. Let somebody else save them. Another entry in his book. Item 9. Pretend you didn't see what you saw. Take no action. Think happy thoughts. He was bound by the old rules of balance, the mystical bond placed upon all insanely powerful creatures. He could soar the heavens. He could frolic on a star if he wanted, but he couldn't save a life or directly influence fate. There were age-old rules against that. If he didn't follow the rules, then he was to go to the windage and become a demon, a horrific image whose power was turned to chaos. He closed his bright eyes and twitched his whiskers. He continued to see his vision replayed for him in vivid detail, like a sad vid he didn't want to watch but couldn't turn away from. The death and loss. The end of dreams. Unsuspecting eyes, opened at present, shall soon be shut. Forever. The masses of people going about their lives, oblivious to the deadly wave that is coming for them. Walking, dressing, eating their meals, conceiving new life, only to soon lay unburied on a vast killing field where any who might weep over their fallen bodies are dead too. Somebody, anybody save them. I can't. He prayed for guidance. He looked up to the top of the universe and prayed for one of the Arboreum to hear his call and take some sort of action, to do something spectacular while he watched, taking notes as an eager student, ready to learn. Perhaps next time he had a vision of horrific death and destruction, he'd be more ready to do something about it, with the practical knowledge he'd witnessed firsthand from this experience. I know what to do. I saw a master in action firsthand. Let me at him. The bovine, equine, avian, canine, and ophidian forms inhabiting the Arboreum were quiescent for a change. The silence was telling. He knew that this brutal vision was his alone. If not he, then no one else. No one was coming to save them. Wind played through the branches of the beech trees. Unseen birds chirped. The kittens rustled in their box. Time moved on towards that coming black moment when it would all end. The grove, unmindful and uncaring. What would his mother say? What would she think? She'd probably be quite disappointed that he saw what was going to happen and did nothing. Let it happen. Let them all pass into memory as if they'd never existed at all. He didn't want to fail his mother. And more so, with each passing moment, he didn't want to fail these people either. Like a mangy stray that had crossed his path, caught his eye, and now was stuck in his heart. Like his kittens, the well-being of these doomed people was now his responsibility. Another entry in his book repeated over and over. Item 10. Save planet. Save them all. His pride set aside, his humanity, and the heart his mother gave him spoke. You cannot let them die. You cannot ignore what you saw. You have to save them. But how? How is he supposed to do this? He had the power to help them. He might have to fortify himself with a little bit, add a touch of magic to his already arcane makeup, and then he should be more than up to this task easily. But he couldn't simply swoop in and save the day. He wasn't allowed to do that. There were universal rules against such things. And the only thing the universe cared about was the rules. Nobody breaks the rules, they said in the Arboreum. We'd have to punish you. We don't break the rules. You don't break the rules either. We'd have to redden your eyes and send you to the windage. You want to fix a bad future? Then gut it out. That's why they call it the frustration of the gods. Because it's frustrating. Get it? The ramifications for ignoring or breaking the rules to both them, the people he wanted to save, and to himself would be terrible. They would simply die another day, and probably in a worse fashion than the first time, and he'd become a demon just like his evil twin. Save them. Set me free. Gut it out. If they were to be saved, then he had to do it the right way, the hard way, by ruse and deception, by manipulation, by getting the softlings to take action, to willingly risk their own mortal lives in order to save the lives of others, the lives of strangers, the lives of enemies. The softlings, that's what the Arboreum called them in a rather arrogant fashion. The weak, mortal people, the mundane folk of the universe. Yet it was the softlings that added the weight to the cosmic scales. It was the softlings who ultimately determined what the gods could and could not do, when miracles could and could not happen. It was the deeds of the softlings who gave the gods their arms and filled their quiver with arrows. That's how the universe wanted it. Several more entries appeared in his book. To do. Save Planet X. Thought for the day. The best way to clean up a mess is to get started. Warning. You cannot directly intervene without upsetting the universal balance. Item 1. Add weight to the scales. A. Gather forces you can have faith in. B. Move them into place. C. Push your forces in the direction you need them to go, regardless of the immediate consequences. Blackmail and intimidation tactics might be accepted. See Task 4. Gift giving is applicable. Bribery is also applicable, but not desired. 2. Players. A. Who will participate in saving Planet X? Who will participate? Whose lives was he about to dangle over the abyss? Who was about to get shaken and cast like a pair of dice before the winds of fate? A bit of the demon entered his mind, and the diary continued. B. Get yourself a bunch of expendable lowlifes and zeros, touchpots and pinch bricks. Drag all you can find to Planet X and force them to participate. Threaten them. Frighten them. Who cares if they want to or not? Who cares if they get killed in the process? Nobody will miss them when they're gone. Throw them in like a handful of chopped scallions in a Dutch oven, boiling water, and watch them float. He shook his head and cleared his mind. What had come over him? He realized how easy it would be to lapse and become a demon after all, to be the cause of a tragedy instead of the preventer of one. There really was no way to do this other than to invest himself completely and take the route closest to his heart, to directly involve the people he loved most. He scratched out an entry and continued. Thought for the day. For best results, use the best ingredients. B. Find the most honorable man you can. Lord Blanchford. C. Find a lady whom you adore. Countess Blanchford. D. Find the most powerful person around. Mother. E. Find the person with the biggest heart. Lieutenant Kylos. To these 4 people, you entrust the fate of billions. Note, must be suitably imperiled for weight to be added. He thought a bit. D. Extra weight for reprobates. In addition, I'll need a criminal after all, just one. Find yourself a scalawag or rootless bravo you can trust or blackmail to help save Planet X. A scalawag, a real rot-gut swilling degenerate, will add lots of weight to the scales if he willingly cooperates. Check prisons, bars, alleys, casinos, cricket huts, bowling alleys, and docks for scalawag. 3. Once weight is added, perform miracle on Planet X. 4. Apologize to any whose lives you ruined in the process of saving Planet X. A. Flowers are always nice. Required materials. We'll need a bit of magic to touch yourself up. Possible candidates. A. The Tramalana necklace. Rejected, not powerful enough. B. The Moonglow, a knife. Rejected, really won't help. C. Oberphiliacs, gateway. Possible. If things go bad, can reset. D. Brightstones, a barrel. Will allow you to be in many places at once. Accepted. 6. Chosen resource. Brightstones. A. Brightstones are all registered with the Sisterhood of Light. Stealing one will be dangerous. B. Brightstones kept in a place that is beyond your reach. Will need help fetching one. No blue may walk there. Must have a Johnny. A Johnny may stand where a blue cannot. C. Enlist help of Lieutenant Kylos to fetch Brightstone. It must be Lieutenant Kylos. D. See Task 4 regarding Lieutenant Kylos. Resigned, he looked around at the vast green of the grove and put his book away. A whole planet of kittens needed saving, and he cannot fail. He must not. And he must not lose those he loved in the process. He looked at the little kittens in the box, soundly sleeping in the warmth of the nearby rocks he'd heated. A tear rolled down his muzzle and dripped off. It sizzled on a rock. And with that, we conclude Prologue 1, Item 10, Save Planet X. So, that was pretty weird. But one thing about me, I'm pretty matter of fact in my writing. You can take pretty much everything I put down at face value. If I say something, then I meant exactly what I wrote. I don't speak in metaphors very often. What I say is what I mean. So don't go looking for meaning in this. Just read what was said and acknowledge it. That's what's going on. So I'm going to explain what's going on here in Prologue 1. I'm going to flash what timestamp you need to flash forward to if you don't want to hear this, because it is a little spoilery, a little bit, a lot. So here we go. Flash ahead to this timestamp if you don't want to hear these spoilers. So what we just encountered, and I can say the name because I said it verbatim in the book. His diary is entitled Carahill's Magical Book of Things to Do and Memorable Quotes. Therefore, his name is Carahill. If you've read or listened to the Bloodstein books, that name has popped up before. Carahill, his name has popped up. He is a scion of the House of Blanchford, a staunch defender of the League. And we've met his daughter, Aetha, who is a big part of not only the Bloodstein books, but the Cat books, as Aetha was Cat's god of choice, or the one who helped Cat come into being. Aetha is his daughter. This is Carahill, her father. And Carahill has, as you saw here, has a big heart. He's a prankster, a jokester, but he's a very good person at heart. And he is a god, as I said. I said he was a god, and I meant it. He was created by Lady Poe of Blanchford. And if you've read The Shadowtech Goddess, you know exactly who Lady Poe of Blanchford is. I won't really go into it now, but she made him so well that he became a god. And gods have impassibility in time, so she only created him a few months prior to the events in this book. But gods have impassibility in time, which means once you're created, you've always existed, from the beginning of time to the end. Carahill encounters a doppelganger of himself, and that's one of my fears. I read stories where if you encounter yourself, a doppelganger of yourself, bad things happen, disaster happens. And I remember once at Ohio State, I was just a freshman, and I was just still getting the lay of the land. I was walking down the oval, kind of the center of Ohio State, and I swore I saw sitting at a bench myself looking back at me and watching intently as I passed by. I was probably hallucinating. It was probably just somebody in the distance who kind of looked like me. I was just a kid, and I had a big imagination. I was in a new place, still struggling to come to terms with it, and I thought I saw myself, but it scared the bejeepers out of me. It stayed with me for a long time. In the prologue here, that manifests itself, where Carahill sees an image of himself, but he's a demon. And that's one thing that the gods fear most, is becoming a demon. And how does a god become a demon? By breaking the laws of universal balance. And what is the easiest way to break the laws of universal balance? It's to interfere in the doings of the universe too much. His doppelganger, his evil twin, shows him a vision of a whole planet being destroyed, of billions of people dying. That's what was in the text. And as I said, that's what I meant. I wasn't being metaphorical. I wasn't speaking in some flowery terms. When I said a bunch of billions of people are going to die, that's what I meant. And that's what Carahill sees, a whole planet being destroyed. And what is he to do with this information? He considered just doing nothing. Like, well, what can I do? I can't interfere. If I do, I'll become a demon. But just like with his kittens that he loves to save, and his puppies and other little animals, Carahill has a big heart. He sees these people all dying. He hears their screams And that makes it his responsibility. Now that he knows this is going to happen, it's on him to either do something for them or not. And that's a theme of this book, is how willing are the gods to save or prevent a tragedy? Are they going to try to help out? Are they going to do nothing, just watch? In the Cat book, that alternate version of Carahil did nothing, and as a result, the planet X, as I say, was destroyed, and he, in his guilt, became a demon. Or, if he just swoops in and decides to save them on this planet, their universal rules of balance will apply, and he will throw the scales out of balance, and even though he might save them today, tomorrow they're going to die in a worse way than they would have died before, and then he's going to become a demon anyway. Quite a conundrum. The frustration of the gods, as he mentioned. So, the only way he can do this is to get, he called them the softlings, and that's what the gods refer to mortal beings as. It's kind of a derogatory term that the gods, the softlings, the weak ones. But it's the mortal men and women of the universe who give the gods their arms. In order to do that, he needs to get these mortals, these regular people, to sacrifice their lives possibly for these people on this planet, people they don't know, people who might be enemies possibly. He's got to get them to willingly risk their lives, and that adds weight to the universal scales. And when enough has been applied, then he can swoop in and save the day. But to get to that point, there's a lot that has to happen first. And that's what he was determining in the course of this chapter. We'll see more of this character, Carahil, obviously, in the coming pages. And we actually even see him on the cover standing there next to Lieutenant Kylos. That little silver seal. That is Carahil. The gods usually take the form of animals, but there's a story behind his form, his silvery shape, that we'll get into later. Now then, that weird prologue is done. We get into another one. This is Prologue 2, and it's called The Capture. Once again, as I read this, take what I say literally. There's no glossing, there's no covering up anything with perfumey prose. What I say is what is happening. I learned that from watching the movie Excalibur, where Percival's quest to find the Holy Grail, I always searched for meaning for that. But then after a while, I realized what you're seeing is what is actually happening. I thought it was a vision or an illusion, but no, what he is seeing is what is happening. So let's begin. This is a really short one. It's barely 2 pages. Prologue 2, The Capture. "Who are you?" came a demonic voice over the Duke of Olin's transponder as he dove his black goshawk ship toward the sloping ground far below. The swept-back wings of his ship groaned in protest at the top of a steep dive. Holding his pipe in his teeth, he kicked the lateral bar, lined his targets up, and pressed the button. Flashing lances of starbeams shot out and tore at the people standing on the ground to blasted pieces. The people below were startled. They were in a deep painted cloak, invisible to all. None should be able to detect them. The Duke, however, had a bank of exotic scanners on his goshawk ship. Properly adjusted and carefully tweaked over the last few days of searching, he had them properly tuned and dialed in. He could detect their heat and see them just fine. There they were, the gigantic unwashed men, naked as the day they were born, standing guard, and the ragged, bone-thin women shuttling back and forth. All, either through fear or mindless ignorance, served their abhorred master, and many who were alive and well in the morning often didn't live to see the nightfall. They served a black hat of a cruel and deadly note. Sudden, agonized death was something they lived with. They stood at their posts as the Duke's goshawk roared in on them through the purple clouds. They stood there as pelting starbeams ripped into them. The naked men, the Hogismen, clearly had no idea what to do. They had no necks to wring, no limbs to rend. Like primates, they beat their fists on the ground in agitation, but left their feet planted right where the Black Cat had put them. To move would mean death at her hands. And to stand there meant death too, as the Duke's weapons mowed them down. The ragged females, the adepts who might one day become Black Cats themselves, clambered about. They ran to their emergency posts, manning their dark lights, hoping to catch the Duke's bat-like ship in their sights and send him down in a shapeless pile of black metal slag. Casually, he banked, aimed, and pressed the button. Starbeams. Adepts dead at their posts, their dark lights shot to pieces. A few more dark lights came on and went skyward. He aimed. The lights went quiet. And then the star of the show, the Black Cat herself, came out of her tent, the tent the Duke had been carefully avoiding. In an ironic twist, the Black Cat's tent, where many Hulgismen and adepts died at her hands every day, was, at the moment, the one safe area to be found. The Duke was not going to shoot at the tent. He might hit the Black Cat, and she was his whole reason for being there. She threw open the flap and stormed out in her scarlet robe and black featureless mask. She was, no doubt, used to being in complete control. What was this ruckus? Who was about to die for disturbing her much-needed rest? He imagined all sorts of things must be going through her evil, shadow-tech-clouded head. In his scanners, he saw her look up at his ship and, for a moment, was just as dumbstruck as her Hulgisman guard had been. How was her contingent discovered under full painted cloak? That's what she must be thinking. "Who are you?" came her thoughts over his transponder in a demonic growl. He banked to the west and slaughtered the remainder of the Black Cat's adepts and the few Hulgismen who still had a spark of life in them. Then he turned his black ship to face his prize. The Black Hat was now alone and quite defenseless, for he had picked the time of his attack well. He knew she was drained of her shadow tech. He knew she was out of her head with exhaustion. The Duke knew the Black Hat was quite helpless. She turned and began running to the north, her slender arms and long-sleeved scarlet robe swishing at her side. Unused to running, she quickly tired and began stumbling. She wafted away in a smoky cloud. He saw her reappear a good 10 miles away in his scanners. Not a bad waft. He adjusted his course and was back on top of her in just a minute or two, his vessel quickly covering the distance. She wafted again. Again he followed, and again, over and over. He could play this game all day, however the Black Hat could not. Eventually she tired and fell to the ground, unable to waft any further. He bore down on her. "Who are you?" came her thoughts again as she lay there on all fours, unable to stand. The Duke closed the distance in his ship, and that was that. And that is the end of Prologue 2 the Capture. We see the Duke of Olin, who we'll learn more about later, attacking a Black Hat camp someplace. And Black Hats, in the later books, we don't really deal with Black Hats much, but in the original League of Elder books, Black Hats were the main bad guys, a sisterhood of shadow tech females who can throw shadow tech around. They're Zaphins, and they are a very powerful sect. They are enemies of the League, doing the bidding of their leader, the Black Abbess, who was kind of like the devil, that's how I sort of characterized her. But after a few books, I kind of moved away from Black Hats and moved on to other villains. But the Black Hats were the big baddies in the first couple books. Not very pleasant. They are shadow tech females. They can cast shadow tech. They are under the sway of the Black Abbess, and it's what's known as the Black Abbess's clutch. Basically, they're sort of under hypnosis for the most part, a hypnosis they can't break out of. They do the Black Abbess's bidding pretty much without question, and they can only feel rage and hate and are mostly in a daze for most of their lives, and they live for a long time because of shadow tech, but they're basically under her dominion, do what she commands of them, and do it mercilessly. They're not very pleasant, but like Countess Sigillis, who was a Black Hat, They can be turned. They can have the Black Abyss's clutch broken if you know how to do it and if you have the tools available to do it. So the Duke was doing something most people don't do, because nobody messes with black hats, because they're incredibly dangerous and will destroy you and torture you if they can. The Duke swoops in when the black hat is at her most vulnerable and captures himself a black hat. What he intends to do with her, we will find out in later chapters. So now we get to prologue number 3, and this is called The Death of the Bodice. And this is a little parable floating around my books, around the League of Elder. And this little story, which serves a number of purposes in this book and in other books, this is just part of the lore of the League of Elder. But this little story serves as a parable as to what happens when the gods interfere too much. And what happens is usually not good. This is sort of the counterpoint, the tension, the drama to Carahill's quest to save this planet. This shows what happens to both man and gods when the gods tip the balance. So let's proceed. Prologue 3, The Death of the Bodice. 3,000 years ago, in 99989 EX, they had asked for help for years. They went to the Sisterhood, hats in hand, and told them what they were going through. Our land is poisoned, gone bad. We see demons in the night. We're afraid for our children, they said, and we hear noises on the wind like a furtive drumming. Lord Porter of Bodice and his folk told the sisters how their lands were no longer safe. The sisters listened, thanked them for taking the time to visit, and told him and his contingent that they shall discuss what was told and decide a suitable course of action. Relieved, Lord Porter took his people and returned to their farmlands, confident that the sisterhood would help them. Unfortunately, the sisters didn't think twice about Lord Porter and his lot, these people who had come to them for help, the Bodice, a house of simple-minded farmers from the Hallow region. The sisters, thinking the matter was insignificant, did nothing. Surely, if such a thing was truly happening with frequency, then they, the Sisterhood of Light, should already know all about it, have investigated and collected reams of documentation on the matter. The Bodice, kind and goodly people, must be mistaken, paranoid, or possibly delusional. The matter will sort itself out. The Bodice will be fine. Lord Porter and the Bodice, however, were not fine. They were not delusional. They suffered on their poison lands by the River Severn, their births becoming tainted with deformity and death. They were indeed seeing demons in the night, horrible fleshless creatures, and they heard the maddening drums that never stopped. The demons became bold and knocked on the Bodice's door. They laughed at them and began trying to take their children. The Bodice, ignored by the sisters, melted in fear. They tried relocating several times, upping stakes and rebuilding miles away, starting afresh in a new manner. But the demons always followed them. What were they to do? One night the demons broke into their manor as they slept and took Lord Porter and his large family.
"We're going to burn you,"
they said with delight as they carried them out into the night. A strange creature came from the sky. In a roar, it drove the demons away and released the Bodice. It was huge, elephant-like, with tusks that reached up into the sky and could talk. It loved the Bodice's many children and told them that it could help. It kept the demons at bay and promised it would protect them. For years, the elephant stood watched over the Bodice. The demons stayed away. They were afraid of it. For the Bodice's children, whom he loved, the elephant maintained his vigilance. One day the elephant told them that their lands were hopelessly tainted and the demons had placed a stain on their souls. The only thing to do was leave, and not just leave the area or Hala or the whole of Cana for that matter, but to get as far away as they could, to leave the League and the sisters who had forsaken them. It told them that a vast group of great houses were preparing to go to the Zaphans and join with them. The Bodice were followers of Elder religion and didn't want to go to the Zaphans. The elephant told them there was a green planet far away where they could grow their crops beyond the reach of the demons. The green world was a place where their children could play at safety and peace. It took some convincing, but the Bodice agreed. They trusted the elephant, for he had protected them. They took everything they had and went to the stars. The elephant, all smiles, told them he will be waiting for them on the promised world. And there he waited, and waited in lush fields. But the Bodice never showed. Unbeknownst to him, the cosmos was moving against the house of Bodice. Shortly after leaving Cana, they were beset upon by the house of Charn, also leaving the League for the Zaphans. Unlike the Bodice, the house of Charn was mad and savage, eager to go to the Zaphans. The house of Charn was starving as they made their way through space, and they fell upon the Bodice in their slow-moving, defenseless transport. Boarding their ship, they stole their supplies, their guidance controls, and stellar compass, drained their tanks of fuel, and left them nothing. They killed Lord Porter and threw his body out the lock into space. Desperate, and slowly starving now themselves, the Bodice children cried out for the elephant to come and save them, as he had before. But the universal balance was out of scale and swinging randomly, forming a wall of chaos between them and the eyes and the ears of their protector. Their guardian elephant, so dutiful through the years, couldn't see and hear what was happening to them, couldn't predict the terror that awaited. Such was the danger of upsetting balance. He had upset balance for years, bending it to his will to protect the Bodice. Now the scales of balance were swinging in the other direction, and there was nothing he could do about it. The elephant happily awaited their arrival on the green world, slowly becoming worrisome when they failed to show. The Bodice, out of supplies, out of fuel, leaderless and going hungry, diverted to a dark, smoky world of pits and vapor-filled chasms. There they huddled in their powerless transport and prayed to their guardian elephant for help. After several days of waiting, there was a knock on the hatch of their transport. The children were happy. They thought the elephant had come at last. The demons were at the door, clenching their fleshless fists, and this time there was no elephant to come and save them. First, the children were taken to an unknown fate, and soon the adults were taken as well. They were taken someplace deep, where the beating of drums was loud and terrible, and, one by one, they were burnt alive in basins of fire before a deadly horned god who the demons worshipped. Soon, the house of Bodice, cursed and tormented, forsaken by the sisters, was gone in burnt ash and drifting smoke. A victim of balance, gone astray. The elephant, sitting there waiting for them, was punished for her role in this tragedy. His eyes turned red, his power gone to chaos, and he went to the windage of Kine to stare red-eyed out the windows. The great elephant, in trying to save the Bodice from the demons, became a demon himself. And with that, we conclude Prologue 3, The Death of the Bodice. Very sad story, very telling story, warning of the dangers when the gods dally too much with the doings of man. A god had come to favor the Bodice and saw that their lands were tainted, that they were being cursed by demons, and wanted to help. This God who came to them loved their children, was their protector for years. But in doing so, in protecting them, and not allowing them to do for themselves, to take care of themselves, to care for their children themselves, universal balance was taken out of joint, and their fate was indeed terrible. A number of other things come out of this story. I often mention the holiday St. Porter's Day, and it was named after Lord Porter, the leader of the Bodice, whom the House of Charn killed throwing him out into space. Also, in my epic trilogy, The Temple of the Exploding Head, the temple's location was a big mystery in those books, but spelled out right there in Prologue 3 is the exact location of the Temple of the Exploding Head. You got it. It was underneath the House of Bodice's land. We've seen this story. We've learned the Bodice's fate. And this elephant, this god in the shape of an elephant who wanted to help them but found himself cursed and thrown into Windage of Kind. We will be seeing more of him later on too. So next week, we begin part 1 of this long story. It's called The Sisters Program. And chapter 1 of part 1 is called The Countess of Blanchford. And here the story kicks off in earnest. Next week, we start with part 1 and see what happens there. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.